going to call this meeting to order. This is the August 13th meeting of the Finance Committee. This meeting is being recorded, and I'm going to begin with a roll call vote. I'll start with who I see on my screen. Christine, can you weigh in? Just say
yes.
Thank you. Dee?
Yes.
Greg?
What are we voting on?
Present.
You're just saying that you're here, that you're present.
Present.
Gotcha.
Greg?
Present.
John?
Present.
Tom?
Present.
Dick?
Present.
Andrea?
Here.
And myself, Mary Hartman. Okay, I'm going to keep this meeting brief. It's the very first thing on our agenda is to look at the town and the school budgets. And Dean and I thought that because this year's process is so shortened, that it would be a good idea for us to kind of get prepared for the hearings that we're going to have next week. So next week on Monday and Tuesday, we have hearings. Immediately following the hearings, the Finance Committee is going to sit down and vote on our recommendations on each of these warrant articles. And typically, in a typical season, we would have had several conversations with the schools on their budget and several conversations with the town. We would have had hearings. We would have had conversations amongst ourselves about those hearings before we'd actually taken a vote. But because things are so condensed this year, we're going to have to take a vote next Monday and Tuesday night, soon after we hear their final presentation. So I thought it would be a good idea to just kind of get grounded on where the numbers are now, what's the impact to the property tax as they stand now, and what are some possible adjustments that the schools and or the town could make that would change the property tax increase. So with that, I'm going to try to move this to, I'm going to try to share my screen, pull up a spreadsheet that I put together that I hope doesn't scare you too much. There you go. Can everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to go through this quickly. If you have any questions, please stop me. I'm looking here at the guideline budgets. This is CPS, high school, town, and I'm looking at how they've changed over the course of the last few months, where we are and where we are now. So this is FY20 guideline budget, and this is the FY21 budget that we voted last November, and then we confirmed it again in February. These were the guidelines that we asked the town and the schools to come in at. And if they had met these guidelines, the property tax increase would have been 2.8%, or we thought so then. And this is the increase over FY20. And then in FY21, they actually came in slightly different than our guideline. And this is what was actually published in the warrant that closed in January. So in January, the CPS came in a little bit higher than our guideline. The high school came in a little lower than our guideline, and the town came in quite a bit lower than our guideline. Funny thing though, the property tax increase was actually higher, and that was because the other things that go into the property tax are obviously fixed costs and the estimate for other revenue sources. So based on better information about how our fixed costs would behave in FY21 and our sources of revenue, the estimated property tax increase at our, per the warrant article, was 2.97, but still comfortably under 3%. So now I'm looking over here at the pandemic budgets, and these are the budgets that were presented to us in the last few weeks. We can see that the CPS came in a little under their original warrant, but over what we had originally asked in our guideline. The high school is coming in under the guideline, but over the warrant. And these are moving in all sorts of directions. Bottom line is, based on what they presented to us recently, the property tax increase would be 3.37. So now I'm moving down here, and this column right here is exactly what we have up here. So at the end of our conversations with both the town and the schools, I think we asked Dean to write a letter to the schools and see if they could find some more savings so that we could bring our property tax in at about 3%. And he wrote that letter, and we saw it, and I thought it was a fabulous letter. And we asked the schools to shave off $310,000 off of the off of their budget. And we thought it would probably come from the high school. And let me back up for a minute. The reason we're having this problem, obviously, why these numbers are jumping from 2.97 to 3.37 is because of the revenue shortfall. So here we are, we're at 3.37. We're talking to the schools and asking them if they can save some money to bring us closer to 3%. They had a budget meeting Tuesday. It was a very long meeting, and Dee, bless her heart, stayed to the end, and they actually talked about the budget. So Dee, can you give us an update on where you think they are?
Okay. They actually have talked about budget changes for the last 2 meetings, but as of today's Thursday, Tuesday's meeting, no change to the CPS budget. And in order to take the money, in order to find the $310,000, they looked only at the regional high school budget.
Okay.
In order to get to $310,000, what they need to decrease, the total amount that needs to be decreased is $432,333. And that's because of the split between the two systems, between Carlisle and Concord. And this year, Concord has a higher share because they have more students. And I'll mention that a little bit later. So there was a significant amount of discussion on this. Not as much as the first time around. The first time around, it was presented and everybody seemed to be online, and then they weren't. So they didn't do anything, and on Tuesday's meeting, they talked through, and Jared had the precise numbers that he needed. He didn't have that precise information at the previous meeting. So coming in at the decrease that I just said, the $432,333, it brings them in at a 2.2% increase without the debt.
Okay.
So what transpired at the meeting is a couple of pieces of information. Number one, Lori and Jared were very good at the meeting 2 meetings ago, coming in with these numbers. And I was like, wow, that's kind of surprised me. They had it and had options for them, for the committee to look at. And this time what they did is they focused on where the money would be coming from. So the money would be coming from Chapter 70 dollars, and that was $247,217. And I'm sorry I don't have any charts, but they didn't even have the charts at the time of the meeting on Tuesday until Jared put them up on the screen. So that's Chapter 70, and that was a bit of an issue because this is an unofficial amount. So some of the committee members were a little concerned about that. The other is a CARES offset, or from the CARES Act, and that was $185,116. So those are the 2 areas that they wanted to take it from. They did not want to take it out of any of the prepays. They had 2 areas of prepays, and they didn't want to touch those going into the next year, or actually into this year. Okay, so as the committee was discussing this, there was a bit of a concern about the Chapter 70 funds. And so Jared said 2 things. The first one was that he is in it sounds like constant communication with his peers around the state. And others have said, yeah, this isn't an official amount for the Chapter 70 funding, but everyone had a very good feeling about that was the amount you were going to be given, or they wouldn't have said this amount. So anyway, he feels very confident that they'll get the amount for Chapter 70 funding. A question came up, what if you don't? And in their E&D account, he said it would, any amount, any difference would come out of the E&D account. They currently have, and I've heard 2 different numbers, 1.3 and 1.6 million in their E&D. And 2 meetings ago, it was 1.3, but they had this other 300,000 unassigned. And at this meeting, he said that E&D was either 1.3 or 1.6. So they definitely have the funding. They also have in their circuit breaker account, they have over $1 million. And I don't think I have to say any more about that. Both of them were asked if they felt comfortable with making this change. And both the superintendent and the chief financial officer said, yes, they were. They felt comfortable with it. They actually said they felt it was goodwill, and not just goodwill for our town, but also for Carlisle, because Carlisle Elementary, they had a 5% school budget drop.
Right.
And with taking the money out of the regional account, it would actually bring their share amount down.
Yep.
So I believe that the people in Carlisle, not necessarily the committee people, but the people in Carlisle will be happy about that.
Dee, when you say they were comfortable doing it, do you mean just comfortable bringing it down by the 300,000 that we asked, or comfortable taking out of the E&D? Can you clarify which one you mean?
Yes, good. Thank you for the question. The $310,000. And one remark in passing that the superintendent made, and maybe this is why they were really on their game the meeting before, is because she thought we would have come in with asking for more money than the 310,000. So
Did the school committee take a vote?
they did not take a final vote. They took a straw vote.
Okay, and how did that go?
The straw vote, I would say, is leaning quite heavily towards, yes, we will go with this, but it's not unanimous. They will be taking their final vote, or they will be taking their vote right before the meeting, right before our hearing.
Okay.
So
Okay.
they have a meeting scheduled for at 5 o'clock on that day, at which time they'll be taking that vote. And Jared is preparing 2 sets of slides for our hearing. One, if they agree, one, if they don't agree, or if they come back with another number. One question that came up was, well, maybe we should go back with a different number. And it wasn't presented that way. It was like, do we want to consider that? And I didn't get the sense that they wanted to consider that. I do think they're going to have the numbers to approve this change.
Tom, was there any discussion at the meeting of the order in which these decisions were discussed? I mean, it seems mildly strange to me that the superintendent and chief financial officer would have come up with this proposed reduction without having gotten a sense of the committee first.
Well,
They
didn't come up with the proposed. That was our directive to them.
I understand that.
Okay.
But they were effectively saying they could do it before seemingly getting the committee's acquiescence to it, which strikes me as interesting.
Well, I think it's more interesting than any other word you want to say, because I think that they generally are always prepared for these meetings, and they, think ahead. So obviously the question would have come up. So they had not just these 2 areas to pull the money from, but they had a series of areas from which they could pull the funding. And
Can I just interrupt for a minute? I think the other thing they've got going is they're trying to balance how much they want to use this year and how much they want to keep in reserve for FY22. So I think that's what right now they're trying to balance, because they're looking at FY22.
who's they?
The schools, the
The
superintendent.
school committee.
Right, and well, the superintendent and Jared, right? Because a lot of the expenses that are going to be covered by the CARES Act in FY21 aren't going to be covered in FY22. So they've got, I think your question, Tom, is why didn't they come to us with these, if it was easy for them to find $432,000, why didn't they come to us with that? Is that, no, that wasn't what you were.
No. It's really just a question of process. But
Okay.
anyway, it's not important.
Okay. Dee, does that agree with what I said? Agree with your?
I think that everyone is concerned about 2022. However, I have a very strong sense that both the superintendent and the chief financial officer are confident they will make it through 2021 unless the sky falls.
Right,
I mean,
right.
they feel comfortable with the monies they have there. They know, and they are banking on having a little goodwill. If they do this year for us, and if next year turns out to be horribly problematic, then maybe we wouldn't be going back to them for a reduction in the subsequent year, if necessary.
I do remember when they came in and presented to us, they also had 611,000 of carry forward that they're not using in FY21 and they're saving for FY22.
Is that, that's not your, is it called carry forward? Is
Or,
it called
yeah,
anything else?
Something like that. It was in the presentation that they made to us, that Jared and Laurie made to us the last time.
I think that's a different, what do they call it?
I think that's the prepaids, Mary.
Thank you.
Well, the prepaids came up to about 600.
That's right.
It's
That's what I
not the
think.
circuit breaker though. You're not talking
right,
circuit
no,
breaker.
right.
Circuit breaker is
Okay.
Right.
a source of revenue.
So
to
the
them.
prepaids, he has not taken into assumption in the budget, so he could use that for 22. So you're right, Mary, and you're thinking that. That's not what they went to here.
No, they didn't go to that. And so they're
No.
keeping, and again, so that was another pocket that they could have.
They could have used that pocket. They could have used E&D.
Yeah, and I think they actually are using some E&D. They're just not using, they still have a health.
No, that's not.
They're not using any E&D,
Well,
Not at this time.
Not
They
to
have-
not to bridge this gap.
but
I
they
think
are
the
for their
the
original.
E&D was the reason that Moody's upgraded the outlook to stable. It was the development in E&D. So I'd be surprised if they were using it.
Yeah.
They are not using the E&D for this $310,000 reduction.
That's true, but I thought they had, and I could be wrong, I thought they were using some E&D.
They are. They are using,
Right.
now that, that was what Dee, you were referring to. I don't, remember when you said he had 300,000, he wasn't sure if he was going to put
Yes.
it in E&D or not?
Yeah.
That's the 300,000. So
Is that the 300,000?
that's what you're talking about there. So I think, Mary,
Okay.
in the schedule that we saw, he
Yes,
was taking 300,000
yes.
out of E&D to put it in the budget. He may or may, I don't know where he's going to land on that, but he was on July 27th, whatever that date, that schedule was.
Right, you're right. So they're taking, they originally thought they'd take 300,000. They might have to take more if Chapter 70 comes in lower than
That's right.
they're now estimating. But it sounds to me, Dee, like from what you've heard, that there's a strong probability that they will find the 432,000, which means that our assessment would be $310,000 less. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Okay, that's good. If
It
that
might be pennies off of $310,000.
That's
He
fine.
didn't say, but that's the number he was shooting at.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So if they do find that, then our property tax increase based on what we think now about fixed costs and what we think about revenue sources would be about 3.02%. The other thing that's in play would be that the town also has $300,000 that they could well, I'll stop. I'll just say that that's also in play. And if they did that alone, then that would bring the property tax down to 3.03. If both of these things happen, both the schools come in and the town reduces by another 300,000, the property tax increase would be 2.68%. And then I put this down here to just help us maybe when these budgets come in at the hearing and we're trying to, if they're different than what we expected, what would the impact be on the property tax? It looks like it's about 0.5% for every $50,000 in one direction or another. So this was the reason that Dean and I wanted to meet with you tonight, is to just kind of get us grounded on where we are and what we're expecting to come at the hearings, and what would be the impact on property tax from a guideline perspective. And that is one of the primary roles of the Finance Committee. So I think it would be good to know this going into the hearing and having to make a decision after the hearing whether we support or not, rather than trying to figure this all out. I think we're all going to be pretty tired after all the presentations on Monday and Tuesday nights. Any questions on this? Any comments or questions on this? Christine?
I just have one question. Mary, can you refresh my memory? What was the town potential adjustment coming from? I don't remember leaving with them having anything else.
I have their presentation. I know that Carrie held out $300,000. And I'm looking at it now. She says 300,000, and let me go back. I think I'm gonna have to make this up.
Okay. Well, yeah.
I don't know, Christine, off the top of my head.
Okay, I can go back and look. I just don't remember, because I thought we were comfortable with where they ended up. So I know we didn't ask for it. So maybe it was something they came up with on their own.
Yeah, didn't they find some in salaries and positions that they weren't going to fulfill? I remember.
I have it here in front of me. Do you want me to just, they came out with a total of 1.8 in either savings reductions or carry forward. Some were timing, some were real savings, some were better estimates for costs. That was 1.8, and they figured they only needed 1.5. So they only really.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I remember that. So okay. So they might stick with the 1.5, or they could put in a little more.
They could, and that would, so that's in play. Any other comments, questions? Anybody have a feel for what they think would be a number we should be shooting for?
So can I just make a comment? The good news is that the rate of increase to the existing taxpayer is at a lower rate of increase, post-pandemic and post-adjustments than it was, before. But at 2.68%, the fact remains that that is a multiple of the current inflation rate. And if I'm not mistaken, the estimates for income declines in Massachusetts in the second quarter are down 11%. So we're talking about a property tax increase here to existing taxpayers that's a multiple of the inflation rate in an environment where incomes have declined dramatically. And I just think we ought to keep that in perspective a little bit.
So John, are you suggesting we move the goalpost for them, or?
Well, Dick, it's probably late for that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Was there any discussion with respect to Chapter 70 and the UGGA funds being sustainable at level funding? I mean, the state of Massachusetts is in, quite a interesting financial situation. As we all know, the unemployment trust has been, completely spent, and the state is borrowing from the feds just to fund unemployment. I guess I think about, the next fiscal year and whether the Chapter 70 and the general funds, the unrestricted are sustainable beyond, this fiscal year that we're talking about. And I don't know the answer to that.
I don't think any of us do, actually. And if what I've read is at the federal level, the next package that the Democrats and the Republicans are debating can or could not include aid for states and municipalities. That's, I don't know if anybody else has any better information, but that's, so what's going to happen at the state level, which as you pointed out, John, will have a big impact on our budget in FY22 is,
Yeah, I
don't
think
know.
in FY22.
And
Yeah.
I don't know what that's going to be. This year they were promised level spending, and in fact, as Dee pointed out, Chapter 70 is going to be actually a little bit higher than level spending, level funding. So I don't know what's going to happen. But
Does anyone have any observations about how this rate of increase might reconcile with our, sustainable growth rate policy?
well, we had that conversation when we developed the initial guideline, that 3.25%. Remember, we had that way back in November.
That was
In the good old.
that
right?
could have been. Yeah, that was quite a while ago. A lot of things have changed since November.
Well, but the process remains the same, and we don't, the process was that we had a sustainable growth rate of 2.16 at that time, and we had we set the guideline at 3.25 and I remember explicitly it was a glide path because the sustainable growth rate is a long term. We're shooting for this long term, not right away. And since then, the sustainable growth rate has gone down quite a bit. So, which is exactly what Chris published in her letters, which is what the sustainable growth rate is right now and how that should inform our budget increases in FY22. But
Isn't that the one that's 0.98 or something?
It's 0.645.
0.645%.
0.645?
Yes.
We also have to be realistic that the, how much of our budget is labor and how much of that is determined by collective bargaining. So, we're kind of in a tough spot here. We know what the sustainable growth rate is, but we have to be realistic as far as what we can achieve. That's my opinion.
I have a question. Having missed a couple of meetings, this may have been discussed, so I apologize if it was. But John referred to a statewide reduction in income, and that personal income, I'm assuming, of 11 point something percent. We're lucky enough to be in a town where income is higher than the state average, and I'm guessing that the reduction townwide is considerably less than 11%. But are there any indications from the tax collector resulting from the first quarterly taxes that are post-COVID that there's going to be any kind of distress in real estate tax collections?
Actually, Carrie said that collections for property tax are actually higher than they were in prior quarters, but we have to keep in mind that a lot of property taxes are paid by the banks that hold the mortgage. So, and they want to protect their mortgage, so they pay the property tax. A lot of people have property taxes held in escrow when they get a mortgage. So the fact that property taxes are being collected on time, to me, I think is a weak indicator of the financial distress on Concord citizens. And I'm open to other people's interpretations of that, but I find that not a good indicator of how much stress people are under. What do other people think?
I think in one meeting, remember Dean pointed out that I think wasn't it a number around 20% of people, are not employed anymore due to either they lost their job or they're unwilling to go to that. I believe he mentioned that in a previous meeting, which is probably, Tom, to your point, more of a hit, not just the lost income that some of the residents do have.
Right. Yeah, I was really trying to find out whether we have any indication that in the immediate and short and then longer term, we're going to have problems with tax collections.
I think if there are going to be problems that they're going to lag. I was talking with the treasurer at the city of Boston, and they have plenty of cash right now. They said they've been very pleasantly surprised that their tax collections have stayed very strong. So it's not just Concord where it's strong. Even in city of Boston, collections have held up so far.
So Dick, do you think that's an indicator of how people are doing?
Well, it is tough to say. As you said, anytime there's a mortgage involved, banks are escrowing taxes. They are going to want to see those property taxes kept current. That said, property in and around Boston is still very desirable, and owners don't want to lose it to a tax lien.
Mm-hmm.
So, so far, things have held up. Is that a predictor of the future? And if so, how long can it be sustained? That I don't know.
That's unknowable, Dick, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on where we are relative to the town and the school budgets and what we know going into the hearings?
Sorry, can I just clarify one question? Dee, I think, did I understand you to say that the Carlisle Finance Committee asked their school for a 5% reduction in their budgets?
In their elementary school, yes.
A 5% actual absolute reduction?
That's what was reported at the meeting.
Yeah, that was my understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Dee's right. Yes. But in the town of Carlisle, the finance committee has a lot more authority and gets much more tactically involved in the budgets. The model is very different than it is here in Concord, where we have the strong town manager model. So I think we're kind of constrained a little bit by the governance model that we have.
Was
that
they had trouble with their tax collections? Do we know?
I don't know.
Nothing was reported. Along the lines, though, of looking forward and the idea of goodwill, if the schools do come in on our side, or if the school committee does come in on our side and dropping to the 310,000, I'm wondering, would it be something we would talk to both the town and the schools about with regards to the lower amount? Instead of 2.16 that we were looking at, it's going to be 0.645% in terms, and how that might influence the kind of the guidelines for 2022. Am I making any sense?
Well, well, let me say how I'm interpreting your question, right?
Okay.
Will we take that effort by them this year, okay, to help us meet a 3% tax increase? Will we take that into account when we're developing the guideline for FY22?
You took it a step beyond what I was thinking, which was just to present to them what we think these numbers are going to be in a subsequent year and what we're looking at in a subsequent
I'm
year.
going to defer to Chris here. Chris, what's the process for setting the guideline?
Right. So, we'll enter into that pretty soon, right? So the guidelines, we have two different sort of things that we're looking at, right? So we have a long-term measure, which is the sustainable growth rate, which we've announced that already. That was the 0.645. I view that as kind of a long-term benchmark, right? We want people to know, here's what the inflation rate looks like, and here's what the expected inflation rate looks like. It's a combination of those two things. So we have that as I'll call it a benchmark, if you will. And then we're also looking at, as a committee, what do we think the taxpayer can take for FY22? And we're going to look at what's going on in the economy, what's going on locally, what do we think the town is looking for in terms of expected services. So certainly we may have an increase in expected services from the schools. Perhaps it's something different as well in the town, depending upon what goes on in COVID. So I think we take all those factors in and we stand back from that. We understand what their pressures are going to be on wages. And we say, okay, what do we think that a reasonable growth in the taxes can be? So I think that's the process that we go through in the fall. It's not a formula, it's a discussion.
To
I
me,
guess I'm just kind of wondering if the schools in the town can expect it will be lower than what we currently set out
we haven't set one up.
this year.
You
We
mean,
We haven't set one up.
We haven't done anything about it. I'm just kind of,
yeah.
No, we haven't.
Yeah,
we-
no, I think I know you're saying, kind of saying directionally, is this give back, or whatever you want to call it, the cut that we asked for, is that somehow going to be influencing the number for FY22? I would say not necessarily. It really was an FY21 ask. However, we'll certainly take into account, how we all work together. I think we have a very good working relationship with the schools and the town. And this, the work that we've done this year is part of it. I thought both bodies did an excellent job on revising the budgets. I think they've done a good job. So I think that, and the fact that they are willing, because they where they ended up was really pretty strong at the end of 21, which is why, and that we also have a problem with revenue in the town. The town took most of it. We're asking the school to take some of it. If they're willing to do that, that's great. But I think it's good for the working relationship. I don't think it goes into a calculation where we would deduct the 300 from next year, Dee, if that's what you're asking.
oh, no. I was just thinking about the percentages and, the ones that you had mentioned. And
Yeah.
just wondering if that's going to have some influence on the final amount, the final guideline percentage. And just to inform them of what these are right now.
Yeah, we can't do that
Okay.
yet. Yeah, because we haven't
Not what our guideline is,
Oh.
but other factors that are going to come into play. Do we have a list of factors that come into play that we can say, these are the factors, this is what's happening out there right now in terms of.
I don't
can
have
we go
that.
up or down?
I don't know if others do. I don't have a number in my head, or, as I said, it's a process we go through that says, what do we think is going on for the taxpayer? Can they take 2%? Can they take 1%? Can they take 5%? It's some of that's going to depend upon what we really think the revenues are going to be in the town, because that's probably going to be the biggest factor, right? If revenues,
Right.
21, really, it wasn't that bad, right? It was 2 quarters, or maybe a quarter of really impacted state and local receipts. Next year, it could be 4 quarters of that. And so I think we're going to have to do some modeling to figure that out. But I would tell you this, we'll certainly keep them informed all along the way. When we start having it, it's going to be pretty soon, to say, okay, we're going to have to do some models to say, what do we really think could happen to state and local receipts here? And what does that mean to the taxpayer? And if it, I'm just making it up. If that came back and we said, gee, if the taxpayer had to absorb all of this reduction in revenue, what would that look like, versus asking either the town
Right.
or the schools to absorb part of it, or we use our reserves, which, you never know. If 21 ends up okay, you might have money left over that you could put into 22. All of this we won't know, and that's the tough part, is that the schools and the towns are operating with a lot of unknowns, and so are we. So, I think the best way is to come up with something that's as reasonable as you can get it, and have some contingencies. And both those parties have done that, I feel. So
Right.
I feel okay.
And this
brought up-
year has been very
you brought up-
different.
You brought up the reserves, Christine, right? And
Yeah.
I think that was a good thing to bring up, because we'll be talking when we have our hearings next week about some of the articles that are looking at using some of our free cash.
Right.
But our free cash position is going to be a very important factor when we think about how we might make the FY22 budget.
Right.
And I guess I would say the goodwill part for me plays out as when we have our conversations with the town and the schools, that they're really honest problem-solving conversations, and we're not gaming each other.
Right.
That's what I think of when I think of as goodwill, is
Yeah.
that we really are trying to solve the problem. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, we might have slightly different priorities, but we're all in this together, as opposed to gaming, which
Right.
is, we don't want to go there.
No.
I just had one other question.
They've been very good.
I do
I think they've been very open, transparent about where they are and what
I
they're
think
doing.
they have been too.
So I feel very good about that.
Okay,
When do we have to have, just one question, when do we have our final guideline?
we have to have a
November.
guideline published by November 30th,
Right.
right? We have to have a guideline published by November 30th. And then we usually have conversations, and then usually in February, I think we finalize it or we move it, depending upon new information. If that's
In
my,
February?
yeah, that's my memory, but don't,
But we tell them, Dee, at the end of November.
Okay,
but it's not, well, we publish a guideline, but it has some flexibility in it.
Right.
Okay, anybody else have any comments or questions about this? Great. Okay, move on to the next agenda item, the observer assignments. I sent those out. If anybody has any questions or any problems with any of those, please let me know. It's not too soon. Some of you have asked me if you can, if it's time to start contacting your committee or your board and introduce yourself and start attending their meetings. That you should do that now. You don't have to wait for town meeting. You can, get yourself introduced and on board now. The more we know about what's happening in the town, the better equipped we are to make good decisions and to influence good decisions.
So Mary, would that just take the form of us individually emailing the chair of the committee and informing them that we're the FinCom observer? Is that the way it would work?
Yep, and attend the next meeting,
Okay, thank you.
and just introduce yourself and yeah. So I think that would be great. The last thing is public comment. I don't think there is any, we don't have any public. Good. I said it was going to be a brief meeting.
I have a question.
Andrea?
The Council on Aging did meet.
Yep.
They did not have a quorum. There were a lot of issues, a lot of problems, and they're not even sure whether they're going to be able to meet at all, the way things are going. And there was a lot of concern about elder abuse and the fact that nobody is able to visit people. This is a common problem now, even Meals on Wheels. So it was a disturbing meeting, and there wasn't a consensus as to whether they should even consider to meet once a month, quarterly, or not at all. Everything was really left up in the air, which kind of disturbed me. But I understand it sounded like the building isn't open. Minuteman Senior Services can't even go into their office. I guess the building is not set up for social distancing, or they're like little cubicles, really tight. And they do not have they're funded by the state, and that funding is not there. So it was a sad meeting for me, just to hear all of this. One of the questions that came up, and I didn't know where to go or how to answer it, was raises for the support people. They have managed to get a van or a couple of vans available to take people to doctor's visits. But wanting to know whether raises that were due July 1st would be retroactive when the budget is passed.
I really think
I don't know who to ask.
that would be a question for the town manager.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, because they get, you mentioned that they get some of their funding from the state, but they get some of their funding from the town. So that would be a question for the town manager. But that's
it.
too bad. That's too bad.
Yeah, it was
they're getting hard to.
disturbing meeting. That,
Andrea,
you know,
can they not meet over Zoom? Do they not have the ability?
well, it took quite a while, and I think there were 3 attempts. And finally, Kate Hodges set them up with her personal Zoom credentials so that they could call a meeting.
Yeah,
But they didn't have a quorum even.
yeah.
So it didn't sound good. It really didn't.
Yeah.
And that's a whole segment of the population of the town
Right.
that is just kind of cut off
No, it's very important.
from services.
Yeah. It's good conversation with the town manager about what's going to happen.
And or the select board too,
Yeah.
to make that a priority.
I will pass that on.
Anybody else have anything they want to talk about? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second,
I guess I do have to take a vote. I do. Christine,
Aye.
Dee,
Yes.
Greg,
Yes.
Dick,
Yes.
Andrea,
yes.
Tom,
Aye.
John,
Yes, please.
Phil, and myself, Mary. Yes. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
everyone.
I'll see you next
Great
Monday.
meeting.
Bye.
Monday.
And Tuesday.
Bye.
Aye.